With the latest update to Lords of the Fallen, they added a completely new quest line called Way of the Bucket, increased the game's performance, but more importantly, 6 new spells have been added to the game. I wouldn't say they're entirely new though, because we have seen them throughout the game. They're just new because now we can actually use them. I'll start off with the first one, Septic Hees. You hurl several putrid orbs which inflict physical damage and poison buildup. It only costs 15 mana to use and you need 8 Radiance and Inferno to cast it. This is definitely an early game spell based on its requirements and mana consumption. The damage it puts out proves that even more, with my catalyst having 700 spell power, which is a lot to be honest. The Hysteria Pendant increasing spell damage by 20%, and the Passant's Root Ring increasing spell damage by another 10%, Septic Hees still can't put out enough damage to be considered even a usable spell. The poison buildup you get is a nice addition to the spell, but even so, status effects in this game are so underpowered it doesn't do much. The only way they can make this a viable spell is if they either increase the damage or increase the amount of damage status effects do, because this is something where it's not even good enough to be used in the early game. Yeah, it doesn't cost that much mana, but you're also not getting much out of it either. I'd honestly completely avoid this spell. There's no pros to it whatsoever except being really cheap on mana, and that's about it. And before I get into the next spells, I'm going to be using the same catalyst, rings, and pendants, so nothing ends up doing more than it should. The only thing I'll be swapping out is the Ring of Radiant Premiance, which just allows me to cast Radiant spells without having a Radiant catalyst, and that's about it. So continuing on, we have BallisterSalvo. This one unleashes a volley of infernal darts which inflict physical damage and burn buildup. Costing 25 mana per cast and requiring 18 Inferno to use it, the damage isn't too bad. Nothing I'd use in the late game, definitely more of an early game pick, but it's not as bad as the previous one. See, this one can actually do damage, but only when you're up close. This spell is the definition of a weak shotgun. You can't shoot at people from a distance because almost everything is going to miss, and when you're firing it up close, it doesn't do nearly as much damage as it should for you to take that risk of being so close. And lastly, it's kind of impossible to proc the burn status effect with how little it builds up. Every time you use this, you'll just end up killing whoever before burn can even proc, and believe me, it takes a lot to kill some of the stronger guys with this. To make it a decent spell, they'd have to buff the damage a bit, not by a crazy amount so you're not one-shotting people, but at least enough to the point where I don't have to cast it 8 times to kill something. Decrease the time it takes to cast it and add in some kind of stagger effect for when multiple darts hit so you don't get punished as badly for being up close. Definitely an improvement from the last one, but still far away from being good. The next one on here is Vortex of Torment. You summon a Radiant Cyclone which inflicts physical damage, bleed buildup, and apparently smite as well, but in the Steam page it doesn't say that, and in the game it does. Not sure what went wrong there, but if it does proc smite as well, that's another great bonus. The spell costs 100 mana per use and requires 25 Radiance to cast it. The high mana cost and Radiance level indicates that this is going to be a mid to late game spell, cause why else would it cost so much and require so many points in Radiance just to use it? The first thing I noticed is the damage was a big step up from BallisterSalvo. It could definitely kill the stronger guys much faster, but that still doesn't say much. The nicest part of this spell is it has this tracking feature where it follows your target and then explodes shortly after, leaving behind this holy barbed wire that continues to damage them. It's actually really good if you combine this with a melee build, because once you cast it, you don't have to worry about it or anything, and it also procs bleed, which is going to increase the physical damage that target takes. There are some big rooms for improvement though, like the spell costing 100 mana is way too much for what it does. Drop it down to anywhere around 60 and it'll be good. The tracking on it is a nice feature, but it's really slow, so half of the time whoever you're fighting can outrun it pretty easily, unless you're fighting them up close with a melee weapon. And finally, the damage, yeah, it could be better for costing so much mana and needing a high Radiance level to use. Not the worst in the bunch, but not the best either. Moving forward, we have the Tolling. It unleashes a wave of radiant magic which inflicts holy damage and is capable of knocking enemies down. It costs 60 mana to use and requires 30 Radiance to cast it, so quite the investment to use this. The only pro I have to say about this spell is it doing decent damage. I'm not gonna act like this thing's a nuke or the worst source of damage, but it's pretty bad though. I don't even know if I would say that's a pro to it, but yeah, let's dive into it. So the first issue for this spell is the range. I get that it's an up close spell, but man, you literally have to be right beside whoever you're fighting. That's the first problem with it. The second one is it states it can stagger enemies, but when you use this against some of the stronger guys, they plow through it like a wrecking ball. There's barely any stagger to this at all. And the third third issue is it takes too long to cast this when you're that close to somebody. This is a spell you use when you want to die as a distraction. Like, to make it somewhat of a good spell, you gotta increase the damage, the range, the stagger effect, and maybe add some kind of increased defense when using it, cause you're just a sitting duck. Again, the only positive thing I can say about it is it does okay damage. I would never go out of my way for this spell unless I was trying to collect all the items in the game for an achievement or something. And right when I thought the spells couldn't get any worse, Rising Fire enters the building. You summon 3 orbs of fire which explode following a short delay, inflicting fire damage and building up Ignite. It costs 40 mana to cast it and 22 Inferno to be able to use it. I would say it's got the second best damage out of all the spells here, and it's not too bad either. Each fireball does around 500 damage. Obviously it's going to be a bit different for everybody depending on what items you use, but anyways, since you summon 3 of them, in theory, I can get 1500 damage out of it. Now, I said in theory because this spell is horrendous. The amount of time it takes for these to come out of the ground and explode, whoever you're fighting won't be anywhere close to it. Not to mention, the explosion has awful range. Like, it's impossible to hit anyone with all 3 orbs, very difficult to even get 2 of them, and a complete challenge just to land 1 of them. They gotta increase the blast radius, shorten the time of these to explode, and then it would honestly be a good spell to use. The 40 mana cost and 22 Inferno needed for it, I would say that's okay as of right now since no one is going to use this. But if it does get those kinds of buffs I just said, I could see them increasing the mana cost to balance it out more. This spell has a lot of potential for the future, but as of right now, it's borderline useless and not dependable. Coming to the last spell on the list, we have Pallid Bile. You unleash a torrent of umbral magic, inflicting wither damage and building up poison. I'm not exactly sure how much mana it costs cause it doesn't say, but it consumes mana for every second you're using it, and it appears not to eat up as much either. You also need 15 Radiance and Inferno to use it, so right off the bat, nothing bad. When it comes to the damage, I genuinely expected this thing to be bad, but I was completely wrong. This spell packs a punch. You're pretty much a flamethrower with wither damage. Normally, I would say wither damage isn't too great, but since this spell can also build up poison and proc it fairly quickly, all the wither damage just turns into regular damage right away. I would say this is by far my favorite spell out of the bunch, especially where the status effect actually plays a vital role in the damage. I think they nailed this spell almost perfectly, no crazy high requirements to use it, mana consumption seems very fair. The only thing I'd want to see change to this is increasing its damage just like all the other spells here. Like, it's good out of the bunch, but in comparison to all the other spells in the game, these new ones that just got added in are going to be overlooked entirely and almost never used. I like the direction they were heading by adding more spells, but I think the execution of it wasn't there. These spells all need a lot of improvements before anyone can consider using them. In order to get all of these spells, you'll have to farm them off of the enemies that use them. Odds are you're going to pick them up by accident because of how many guys in the game use these spells, so don't stress out too much for how to get them. Really, don't stress out at all because they're not worth it. I still like and appreciate how they're adding more content and frequently updating and patching the game. It just shows that they actually take care of the game and their players and didn't just pull a quick pump and dump. I got high hopes for Lords of the Fallen, and I can't wait to see what else they got in store for us later on. Well, if you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to check out my other build guides, and stay tuned for next week, cause I'm putting together a new build that'll completely break the game. Thanks for watching, everyone.